This story has been recorded at an Addictive Eaters Anonymous meeting in New Zealand. You can email us at contact@aeanz.org.
And tonight, because it's the first Friday of the month, there's a speaker meeting, and the speaker tonight is Leonie.
My name's Leonie and I'm addicted to food. When I came into the program, I didn't know I was addicted to food. I didn't come to the fellowship expecting to find a solution. What was I hoping for? I was hoping that I would come to this meeting and lose weight. And I expected it to be very helpful for about a month. And I thought, yeah, that's good, I'll lose weight in the month. Because I'll do everything they tell me. And I've no idea what I'll do after that. Because I knew that would be that thing tried. And I still would want to eat all the time and have this craving and this obsession in my mind that I started to become aware of when I was probably 12 or 13 years of age. Prior to that, I can remember before I went to school, stealing food from pantry at home and making sure that my mother never saw me. And, you know, even at that age, I felt guilty. I felt guilty about doing it. But I did it. When I was young, my mother used to bake, and she taught me how to bake, which was pretty normal at that time. And we would bake together. And I would enjoy baking because you get to lick the bowl when you're young. And I can remember whipping cream and taking fingerfuls of cream when my mother's back was turned. And I felt bad about that, you know, even at a young age, but I did it. When I was about 9 or 10, a girl at school, I can still remember who she was, called me fat. And I didn't like being called fat. So eventually I asked my mother if I was fat. And I found that very difficult to actually say those words. And my mother said, no, Leonie, she said, you were just right. And I did not like that answer. So from that moment, I decided I was going on a diet. But I wasn't telling anyone. But I became very aware of what I ate, the calorie count of the food, and I was very proud of myself because I didn't like chocolate at that stage. And when chocolate was offered or was available, I would say no thank you. And but there were plenty of other lollies that I ate, but not chocolate. And I played sport. I was fairly active. So in my teen years, I played tennis and hockey, and particularly with the tennis, it was in the, 6 months of the year. It would have been daily in competition tennis. And I always would think to myself, well, that's good, it'll help me lose weight. The craving and the obsession with the food was starting to develop from about 12 or 13 years of age. And once again, it was something I was very ashamed of. And I thought it was something that I had to fix. I had gone through school, fairly easily. Things came to me fairly easily. And I just thought this was another problem for me to fix, really, from that age. And started going out with the man I would marry, my husband. When I was 14, he was older, a couple of years older. And I used to find it very strange on the occasions that we had lunch together when I was working. He would feed the birds with his lunch. And I found that very strange. Why would you give sandwiches to the birds? But I was never able to do that. My starving was fairly much a big part of my life at that stage. I would just not eat breakfast, and I'd have a very minimal lunch. This will be in my later teens. And by the time I'd get home at night, I would be starving and basically ropeable. So if my mother opened her mouth, she'd get her head bitten off because I was so hungry. And then when I would have whatever meal was served up, that would disappear very, very quickly. And of course I would still be hungry because I'd eaten so fast. And I can't remember what else I did with food in those years. But I do remember on Saturday nights they often would have visitors and they would play cards and they would have supper. And I was very good at putting the supper out and taking it away. And I presume I did the dishes and emptied the plates. I was very good at that. And finding it difficult to remember what else I did, but I was very obsessed with my weight. And I'd be very pleased with myself with not eating breakfast and eating very, very little lunch. There'd usually be an apple in there, but there would be very little else. And I wondered why I was hungry all the time and cranky all the time. But that's the way it was. But I obviously was eating a lot more than that because when I was 21, we got engaged on my 21st birthday. So my aunt made 2 cakes. One engagement cake, which must have happened on the day. She must have made it on the day. And a 21st cake, which was, a proper fruit cake, I'd say, beautifully iced, because she was good at that. And I was overweight by this stage. Not tremendously, but I was overweight. And so we were getting married exactly a year later. So I made up my mind I was going to be 9 stone when I got married. And somehow or other I was 9 stone when I got married. The day I got married I got on the scales and there it said 9 stone. One of the things I had done to motivate me, shall we say, was to lose this weight was to buy a wedding dress that was very much too small for me. But it did fit me on my wedding day. Never fitted me again. Well, it would fit me now, I imagine, but it didn't fit me then, again after that day. And it was like a little light switch went on in my brain, and I thought, thank God now I can eat. And I, did binge at our wedding breakfast and supper. I was very sick that night, and I thought I had a tummy bug. And in fact I was quite ill for first 3 or 4 days of our honeymoon, because I ate a lot of cream, which I loved, and of course I hadn't been eating cream, except when I had a binge, before I got married, which would happen. It would happen perhaps once a week, but I was limited in what I could get before I got married, because I lived at home with my parents. So I was limited, but I had lost the weight for my wedding day, and I was very happy about that. And then I was unwell for 3 or 4 days on our honeymoon, and we were only away for 7 days. And when I came home, of course I got on the scales, and I was now 10 stone. And I have no idea how that, apart from the time we were walking down the streets of Wellington, and I says to Brett, let's buy some cream buns. Yeah, okay, he says. And I says, I'll buy 6. And he says, what do you want 6 for? Well, I knew why I wanted 6. 5 for me and 1 for him. And that's what happened. So I can remember that, but I can't remember anything else. So after the week, we came home, I got on the scales, and here I put a stone of weight on, and I thought, never mind, I've done it before, I'll do it again. So back onto the diet. Whatever diet I was on, was pretty much for me, a diet meant writing down what I ate after I ate it. That was one of the diets. And then, if the obsession and the craving got too much, I would then scratch through that day, write 11,000 calories, and that day would be wiped. Because possibly there was 11,000 calories that I had eaten. Because I was not a person who could just eat a biscuit, or even a packet of biscuits. And I was black and white, and I was in the food, or I was starving, basically. Even the diets I endeavoured to follow for the next 15 years were always very, very low in calories, because I was always trying to lose weight. And I thought I was the only person that did what I did with food. I was stealing food from other people's tins when I was at primary school. When I was visiting, depending on how often I visited someone's house and how well I knew the people. But if I were there by myself, and that happened from time to time, I would go through the tins. And Brett's parents' tins, I used to have a ball in them, because he wouldn't be in the room, he'd be in his bedroom studying. I'd be out watching television, his parents would be out, and I would go through their tins. And of course I feel really bad about that, and guilty, and ashamed, and determined never to do it again. Because I never stole anything apart from food. And then, in later years, in my professional dieting, which would be from 22 years of age until I came into the fellowship, I did get money, which wasn't mine, to buy food, and then I'd have to pay it back before I was caught, which I did. So those 15 years before I came into the fellowship, my eating just got worse and worse. The craving was there from every moment of the day, from when I woke up until I went to sleep. And then I would persecute myself with the guilt and the shame. And the more I thought about what I did with food, the worse I felt, therefore the more I ate. And I had so many secrets around my eating, as well as other areas in my life. And they were going with me to the grave. Absolutely sure of that. Because I couldn't tell anyone what I did, because what would they think, for goodness sake? So the person I presented to everyone else was this competent, able woman. But I had, the secret life. And in those years before I came into the program, after I was married, we had 4 children. And because I was presenting as perfect, I did the perfect mother, but breastfed children. And of course that helped me lose weight, and it was really great. And I still played sport all through these years. And then I progressed to squash and played that at night and during the day. And was involved in other things, but everything was weight related. And put all the books on diets, health, losing weight. And every book I bought, I thought this is going to be the answer. Not ever looking for a solution to the solution I was looking for was the way to lose weight and keep it off, and not have to address, the guilt and shame and everything, just my life really. I just sort of want the problem to go away, but I knew that craving, that obsession that was in me would always get me. And occasionally I would lose a bit of weight, but I knew it would get me. And it always did get me, of course. And then I just put more weight on. And over the years, I did put on several stone. And I started a diet club at one stage. And people used to come to our home, and we'd all get on the scales, and we all told each other lies about what we did with food. Apart from one woman, there were about 25 women used to come to our house every week. And we must have all been pretending, I believe, like I was, except one woman, and she was not a food addict. I know she wasn't. And she lost weight, and she was fine. And it was great, a great example to the rest of us. And eventually, of course, I went to a dietitian. I never was honest with anyone about my eating. I just wanted to lose weight. I went to Weight Watchers several times. As long as I lost weight, I kept going. As soon as I broke out and ate off their food program, I wouldn't go back. So I'd join again a few months later at another venue, of course. Because in those days they didn't have computers. So they had a card system, so they didn't know I joined there 6 months earlier. So I was pretty miserable, particularly the last few years of my eating. In those years, all my life I had what I thought of as a spiritual hunger. And I used to go to Sunday school and church and Bible class and listen. And what I heard, and my perception of what I heard, I did not like at all. What I heard was the sin, going to hell when you die because you're such a terrible person, and Jesus died for your sins, and the blood of the Lamb, all this stuff, and I just did not like it. But I kept going because I had this hunger. And after I failed at Weight Watchers, and by this time I had a job as a lecturer at Weight Watchers, because I thought that would help me stay out of the food, and I somehow or other had got to a weight that was acceptable to Weight Watchers. After I failed at that, I thought I'd got to look at this 12-step program. I had read about Alcoholics Anonymous over the years. I had read books that had been written by alcoholics, and I totally identified with them. I thought, this is what I do with food, but I'm not as bad as them, for goodness sake. You know, I haven't had to go to a mental hospital or jail, as some of these people had, but I could identify with the thinking and the pain, the shame, and all that. So I read about, you know, a 12-step program for people that had problems with food, and in a magazine, and I didn't like it. It said they were compulsive overeaters and addicted to food, and it showed a picture of the back of these people, and they were very, very large, and I didn't like that. And it said they went to these meetings, and they usually met in church halls, and they prayed, and it just put me off, the whole thing. But I cut that article out and put it with the rest of my files of information about weight loss and everything related. And then a year or two later I read about the same 12-step food addiction problem in the New Zealand Women's Weekly. And this was it was a softer article. It was just softer, and it wasn't quite so scary. But the only way to get in touch with them was to write a letter to a box number. And I found that very, very hard to do, because I was acknowledging that I just might have a bit of a problem. But I wrote. I had a really bad day or a bad week, and the weight obviously was spiralling up again. And I said my name, just said what my name was, and was there were the meetings in Christchurch. And a girl wrote back and said, yes, there were, and she gave me a person's name and post office box number, which meant I had to go through the agonies again of getting bad enough to write to that one, which I did. And this girl rang me and asked if she could come and see me, and I said no. I said, tell me about yourself over the phone, which she did for some considerable time. And I never said a word. I listened. And I marvelled that she could tell anybody about her eating the way she was telling me. She was telling me everything that I did, but she did it. And she said she'd been very overweight, and she'd been in the program for a year, and she was normal weight now. And at that stage, I think I was still working for Weight Watchers, and I said to her, well, I'm so pleased you found something to help you, but I'm not that bad, and thank you very much. But, you know, I'm fine. Weight Watchers are just fine for me. And of course, once I got off the phone, I was in the food in a big way, and thought about it. However, she rang me back after 2 or 3 weeks and said, how's that going? So I lied again. I said, I'm going just fine. Just fine. Tell me about yourself again, I said. So she went through the whole story again. And I loved listening to her. And I said to her at that stage, well, you've told me where the meeting is. If I ever want to come along, I'll come along and have a look. So the time came when I decided I'd better go along and have a look. So I resigned from Weight Watchers because I didn't feel I could go to Weight Watchers and take their money and go to another program. And that was very difficult because, you know, I'm having to, people were saying, why are you resigning? And this is my husband as well. You know, why do you resign? Why are you resigning? And I found that very difficult. But, you know, crossed and spluttered and came up with something. And the same when I went into Weight Watchers. So I went along to my first meeting, and there were about a dozen people there. 12 steps were on the wall, the 12 traditions were on the wall. They were reading from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this girl was there. And, you know, I'd had an image in my mind of what she looked like, based on what I'd heard her tell me over the telephone. And it was very different. She was very different to what I had imagined. And but she had something that was very attractive. Well, first of all, she was a normal weight, and secondly, she had no guilt. She had no guilt, no shame. And she said, you know, she was putting the steps of the program into practice. She had a sponsor, and I don't think she mentioned being free from the craving, but at that stage it didn't matter. I just identified with people. Everyone else in that meeting was eating still, except this girl. So I rang her up the next night and I said, would you help me? And so she started to sponsor me. And that was the beginning. That was the beginning of this life that I now have. And I had about a month. She told me about giving up food and addiction, swapping from one substance to another. And I didn't have any argument with that at all, actually. Particularly the addiction swapping from one thing to another. I got that and I thought, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. If I want to, I don't know if I even knew the wording. If I want to get what she's got, I will have to do these things. As far as I was concerned, she had found a solution. She didn't have the problem any longer, and I did. So she knew something I didn't know, therefore I was prepared to do what she told me, which I did. And I followed what she told me for about a month. She gave me a food plan and I did it perfectly. And, you know, after about a month I was doing really well. I was, in fact, probably even within a month we'd started another meeting or two. And I thought, this day one won't hurt. One won't hurt. I won't need to tell the sponsor, because I'm just going to have one. So I picked up the one. And immediately it was like that. The switch went down in my brain again. And I was in the food. I couldn't stop. And I did tell her that this is what was happening. I couldn't tell her the quantities because I thought quantity had something to do with it. But, you know, I told her that I wasn't able to stick to the food plan that day or the day before. And so we'd start again. I just couldn't get off the food. I couldn't. And of course I was praying and I believed in God, this warped perception of God that I had. I handed my will and life over to that God right from the beginning. And after another couple of months of it getting even worse, I came to believe share it with another human being if I wanted it to have any chance of being able to find this way of life that I saw in her, and that the alcoholics that I listened to in meetings and saw in meetings, because I was going to Alcoholics Anonymous as well, and I thought, I've got to do that. And that, of course, was even harder than talking about the food. It was talking about the previous my life, and all the shame and the guilt, the resentments, the anger, sexual abuse, all that stuff. And so I made a decision to do that. And I made an appointment to do that. And somewhere around about that time, before I did that fifth step, a few days before, I was eating. And an absolute mess. And I reached a point very early in the morning where I was back in the food, and I prayed, and I said something along the lines of, if I could stop eating for 1 hour, I would be grateful. And I didn't have to pick up the first one that hour or that day. I still wanted to, I still had the craving, still was obsessed with food. And I went and did this fifth step and shared everything with another human being. And it was extremely painful for me to do that. But I didn't have to eat. And that to me was amazing. I did not have to eat. And one day at a time, I have not had to pick up the first one since that day. And one day at a time, for the next 2 or 3 years, I still had the obsession to eat. But it was a blessing in a way, because it drove me to work the program. It drove me to try and carry the message. It didn't drive me to meetings because I wanted to be at the meetings. And so I went to numerous meetings, and I still go to a lot of meetings. But, you know, after a period of a few years, that craving and that obsession gradually faded away out of my conscious thinking. And in the meantime, of course, I was trying to work the steps, and I made my amends list and did that very early on, going around making amends. And so this new way of life just developed. And so I continued to do those same things that I did at the beginning, but I don't come from a place of fear that I'll eat again. In those early years, I definitely was working those steps because I was so scared of going back into the food. I just felt as though I was one step ahead of the food all the time and having to run. But that gradually did fade away. And I do absolutely know today that if I keep doing tomorrow what I've done today, the most important thing in my life is not picking up the first one and trying to carry the message and living according to the steps. I think tomorrow will be a good day too. Thanks, Lane.